You just can't let them go.
Go. Stay on the road. Keep clear to the moors.
Beware the moon, lads.
We were attacked by a werewolf.
I'm not listening to this.
On the moors. We were attacked by a lycanthrope. A werewolf. I was murdered. An unnatural death. And now I walk the earth in limbo until the werewolf's curse is lifted.
Shut up.
The wolf's bloodline must be severed. The last remaining werewolf must be destroyed. It's you, David.
Hello, and welcome to Comic Book Bears Presents The Bear Cave of Terror. I'm your hairy, heavy homo and horror fan host, Steve Morey. Each week, here in the Bear Cave, I invite a horror-loving guest who brings with them one of their favorite scary movies. It can be classic, gory, trashy, obscure, well-known, or something actually made in Britain. In other words, a thrilling work of cinematic terror that we think you might enjoy. In each episode, we'll dig into the flesh and bone of the film, highlighting our favorite scary moments, as well as stories and details from beyond the screen. All while our guest imparts their deep and possibly concerning love for this week's frightful vision unto you, our dear listener. And with me again in the Bear Cave is Mr. Craig Lantz.
Hello, everyone.
Thanks for joining me again for this.
Thanks for having me, man.
Anytime. It's always a pleasure. And what movie are we going to be talking about today?
We are going to bring you the classic from 1981, John Landis film, An American Werewolf in London. And now the thing I want to say about this movie that everybody needs to know, there is only one movie in this series. Do not believe any of the lies that there are sequels because they do not exist. It's like Highlander. There's only one movie.
There can be only one Highlander movie. So yes, I'm glad you brought it up. We will briefly talk about that, I think, a little bit later. But yeah, this is the good one. This is the good film. 1981.
Yeah.
Great year for genre movies, only surpassed by 1982, which, we've talked about in previous episodes. But yeah, I mean, this came out in a year where there were 3 werewolf movies. We started off the year with The Howling, Joe Dante's The Howling. And then we also had Wolfen, which we kind of were talking before we started recording that Wolfen is sort of a werewolf movie, sort of, maybe a skinwalker.
Yeah.
Werewolf adjacent.
Yeah.
It's wolfish, and there's people.
Yeah.
People turn into wolves, and it's werewolfish.
Yeah.
And then, of course, there was this one that came out in the late summer of 1981. I think this one was kind of a big surprise for a lot of people because it twists genres a little bit. It's a horror movie, yeah, but it's also really freaking funny.
It is funny.
It's a blast, and that would come as no surprise to anybody who followed John Landis's work up to this point. I mean, Kentucky Fried Movie, Animal House, Blues Brothers. He was known mostly up to this point as being a comedy director. I think that when this came out being a true horror movie, that it was a big surprise for a lot of people, and a pleasant surprise at that.
It was definitely a hit. I was 10 years old when this movie came up. I turned in the fall of 81. But everybody in my school was talking about this movie, which is really crazy because what the hell were our parents letting us watch this movie for?
It is very much an R-rated movie.
Yes. But everybody was talking about this movie. I don't think I saw it at the theater. It was probably when it came out on HBO or on cable that I saw it that year. And that's probably when most of my friends saw it as well. But yeah, it was, I wouldn't say like on the level of Red Dawn, but it was certainly a movie everyone was talking about. It was It was heavily discussed, probably for lots of reasons, but yeah, gore, violence, the comedy aspects of it, there's
And of course, there's some naked people in it. So that always gets the
preteen, some hormones starting to kick in.
boobies and butts.
Yeah.
But yeah, so so for people who haven't seen this movie, or it's been a while since they've seen it and they just kind of need a refresher.
Yeah.
What is An American Werewolf in London about?
Yeah, so you have two college-age kids, maybe at the end of their college career, David and Jack. They are backpacking through England, obviously based on the title. It starts where they're dropped off near a pub, the Slaughtered Lamb, in this little cold town on the moors, and they go into the Slaughtered Lamb, and it instantly gets quiet. Like, why are there people we don't know walking into this pub? Which, it's a countryside pub, probably not used to strangers anyways. It can be written off, except there's a 5-pointed star on the wall. They finally kind of break the ice with the crowd, and everybody's finally kind of laughing and having a good time. And Jack goes, "Hey, what's with the star?" And everybody's like, "You need to leave." And you get a really great line at this moment, because they're playing darts and the guy misses the dart and he looks at him and says, "You made me miss the board." "I never miss the board." And so they tell him, "Yeah, you need to leave. Get out of here. We don't want you here." They head out, and as they're walking out, they say, "Hey, stay on the roads. Don't go to the moors, and pay attention to the moon." And as they're walking, they kind of meander off the road. And then they notice, hey, look, it's a full moon. And then they're being stalked. And eventually they get tracked down by the werewolf. Jack gets attacked. David takes off running and realizes, wait, I can't leave my friend. He goes back and he gets jumped by the wolf and bit. And then the wolf gets shot. You see a naked man laying there. And it's the people from the inn. I guess the pub, they had a little bit of a, I don't know, call of conscience maybe to go help them. Little too late, but they save David anyways. And he wakes up in a hospital in London 3 weeks later. He's having nightmares and visions of him chasing animals through the woods. Really cool dream that was talked about a lot at the time. The zombie SS werewolves that that attacked his family back home in America, and all of this is happening. And right before he gets released, his friend shows up, and his friend is now undead, a zombie. He's looking pretty rough. His skin's falling off. Some great effects here. In the meantime, Nurse Alex, she has taken a liking on young Mr. David, and so she invites him to come stay with her, and they have their romantic tryst, we'll say. 2 days later, it's a full moon, and he has maybe the best practical effect transformation scene you'll ever see on film.
We've got all these different set pieces. Jack shows up 3 times in the movie.
He does.
And each time that he shows up after he's killed, the makeup effects get even more decrepit and decomposed. And finally, like his last appearance in the porno theater, it's essentially an animatronic puppet, because he's too decomposed to actually be just a mask, with a person with makeup on.
The first time you see him, he eats a piece of toast, and you can see it going down his esophagus. And
so that was actually cut out of the original release because it was a little too gross.
Really?
Yeah. And there were a couple things too, where David first transforms and he attacks like that cheeky couple and guy in the underground. Right. And then finally, I believe 3 unhoused men out at a homeless camp. He ends up killing them. Now that attack actually was cut mostly from the movie because it was a little too gory, and people apparently when that scene was originally shown to test audiences weren't really happy with it, because I guess they're like, that's really tragic. that's not great. So Landis did cut that from the original theatrical run. But yeah, I mean, like the first transformation is fully, visualized, and it comes almost like a shock. So like he's been kind of hanging out in Alex's apartment most of this day, just sort of wandering around, getting food out of the fridge, reading a book, and he just is sitting there, and all of a sudden he starts screaming. And what do we get? We get the sound of Blue Moon in the background, the version of Blue Moon, the cover by Sam Cooke. During this transformation scene, have a semi-romantic song playing while he's screaming in pain. And that practical effects of his transformation, the hands elongating, his face elongating, the fur appearing more and more on his body and his legs and everything just sort of being
he just
stretched
stands
out.
up and he screams and he says, "I'm on fire," and he just starts ripping off
Rips
his
his clothes off.
and
Um,
it's so you feel his pain in this
Mhm.
transformation.
After hearing that it took like 10 hours of application time, for every day that they were filming this, I can understand the actor was probably in pain of his own, possibly boredom because 10 hours is a long time to sit in a chair.
Yeah.
It's such a great scene. This transformation scene shows up in every compilation best of horror movie.
Yep.
I mean, it is there whenever somebody talks about like classic scenes of horror.
Yeah, if you're talking about werewolf movies, people are going to bring this up. It's still kind of the quintessential practical effect. And practical effects today, even removing CGI, are just so much better than they were back then. But it's still just so top notch for its time, for today, for really any time.
Yeah, and I think even people who are using practical effects today during transformation scenes will most likely homage Rick Baker's scene. So Rick Baker, of course, being the architect here and his team. And this was actually the first movie that his team worked on. He had an effects house that he had pulled together, and this was really it where they started. It was EFX. Was the name of the company, and there were multiple people that were part of this work that they did for the film. When we talked about what else came out this year, 1981, you had The Howling. Now, The Howling, the effects there were done by Rob Bottin and his team, and Bottin was a former apprentice of Rick Baker's, so they worked together. Rick kind of taught him a lot of the techniques and everything, and so that's kind of what genre fans who had seen this other werewolf movie earlier that year were kind of expecting, like something of that effect. And Baker, of course, reading an interview of him that he did for Cinefantastique that year, the author had asked him about that. He's like, well, you taught Rob Bottin everything that he knows, and so how do you think that this compares? Like, you're both doing werewolf transformation sequences. And the quote was, "Our shape-altering mechanisms are more sophisticated than Rob's. And remember, I didn't tell Rob everything." So he just kind of was like, yeah, I have my secrets. I have my
As
techniques.
a true master, you don't quite give it all away.
And, for better or worse, I mean, there's some argument to say it's like, gatekeeping and whatnot. So it's a time-honored tradition for a lot of
Teach
production.
them enough where they can develop their own techniques.
That's the thing. You don't want an exact copy, but you also don't want to hold
And the
techniques
Howling transformation was fantastic too while we're talking about it. So it's not like it was not a great transformation as well.
Exactly.
With its own techniques that you don't even see. You can definitely see a similar style, but you can also see where they split and have their own.
And one of the things too that even Baker says, and this is probably why he ended up getting the first Best Makeup Oscar that was given out as an official category for 1981 for this movie, was that it was done in full light. So it was a brightly lit scene, so there was no place to hide in shadow.
Yeah, he's sitting in the room reading a book when it happens.
And you've got hands extending, you've got spine splitting, everything is very right in focus. Like, you see it on screen and there's no place to hide.
And it should also probably be pointed out, a lot of times, The Howling, for instance, is a wolf man. It's a man in wolf form. This is a man that turns into a wolf. I mean, a big wolf, but yes, he turns into a wolf.
It's really cool. And I think that that's one of the biggest things that this film is remembered for. Obviously, is just that, that practical transformation, but also just some of the other things too. You talked about the nightmare sequence with the zombie Nazi werewolves and stuff, but the facial features, the muzzles and the teeth and everything, like those are then recreated on David Naughton's character, but as practical effects. So like, his eyes are crazed and his teeth are all.
Kind of all of the dream sequences are different versions of him as a wolf, right? There's him as an actual wolf chasing a deer, I think it was, through the woods. There's a version of him that's almost vampiric looking. Again, it's kind of plays on all these different looks of what you might think of when you think of a werewolf, or just monsters. But the nightmare sequences obviously were a big talked about point back when this movie came out. The opening sequence also. This movie, we talked about it before we started recording. This movie has a lot of comedy in it. So you have a lot of tension breaks. And even in the opening sequences here, where from the pub to them actually getting attacked, it's a pretty terrifying sequence of events from the time they leave the pub. Even the way that the people interact with them in the pub. If you didn't know you were watching a werewolf movie, even though it's in the title, if you didn't know you were watching one, you would know, this is more than just people being weird. And then you have this kind of being stalked by this werewolf out in the open. They tell him stay on the road. I don't know how the road protects you from a werewolf, but that's what they were told by not only the people in the pub, but the guy that dropped them off in the truck. All these hints, and it's just this really good buildup to them being stalked, and still is one of the more terrifying sequences, I would say, in a werewolf movie. It certainly instantly lets you know you are in a horror movie.
I think that's a really good point, because this movie does things in a way that we have been trained to expect, or at least audiences in the early 80s would have been trained to expect from, say, a British horror film, like a Hammer Studios film.
Right.
The setup to two strangers end up in a pub and everybody's creepy, and and there's just the things that are said are what you expect to be said. We're going to be mysterious and gruff and like treat you poorly, but we're still going to warn you that, there's a curse or something. That's very much like an expectation that we would have from even as far back as the Universal horror movies.
Right.
There's always like an inn or a pub where people are like, hush, we know about this secret horror that is happening.
Right. And we're not going to share our secret with you. We're going to let you go out and get killed. That's your problem.
And that's, if you think back to when you and I talked about the horror of Dracula,
right?
There's a scene where Van Helsing goes to this inn to find out what happened to Jonathan Harker. And it's the same situation. Here's a bunch of people just doing things that they would do in a pub or an inn. And then as soon as he shows up, everybody shuts up. They're quiet. They look around. The innkeeper's daughter gets admonished for like warning him or telling him anything about the creepy castle and the spooky Dracula and all the things that happen around town. This is the same kind of situation. So like that kind of build up, that kind of introduction to this film is almost like the most classic part about it.
Right.
Like this is what we expect from this type of English set horror movie. That here's the setup.
To let you know you're in a horror movie. You are there. You are seeing a horror movie, and you're going to get these shock moments throughout this movie.
Yeah, even though you've got as your protagonist and protagonists at the very beginning are two sarcastic, dorky Americans who don't mesh well with like the classic country English.
Definitely fish out of water in this.
Absolutely. And that's part of the humor.
Right.
But it also, disrupts the expectation a little bit. Yeah. And then, of course, what happens through the rest of the movie, the character of David, he is a fish out of water already. He's now been cursed with turning into a werewolf.
And he's haunted by his dead best friend.
Haunted by his dead best friend, who's hilarious as a flesh-stripping zombie, basically. But what more than that, everybody around him. And John Landis, when he wrote this, he originally wrote this when he was like 17, 18 years old.
Really?
And, kind of sat on it for a while after he made all these other movies. He was like, now I've got clout. I can make this horror movie that I want. He really plays up the stereotype of the proper English person. And here you've got like the disruptive American who's just sort of like, shit's going weird. Something's happening to me. And everybody around him is like, city American, whatever, just,
Yeah.
not
I
a
think
big
the
deal.
doctor's like, yeah, it was a lunatic. They told me it's a lunatic. I believe them. If it were a madman, if it were a monster, we would have seen it on the telly.
Yeah,
He
exactly.
literally tells him that at one point. And he's like, I know what I saw. And he's, oh, you're overreacting, you silly American.
When David wakes up after his first, transformation, turning into a wolf and killing people, he wakes up naked in the wolf cage or the wolf exhibit at the zoo.
Right.
And he needs to navigate his way back to Alex's apartment with no clothes on.
Right.
And so what happens afterwards is hilarious. But his interactions with people is kind of like, again, illustrating how weird he seems compared to all the overly normal English people that are around him
Right.
that are just like, whatever, strange American
Right.
doing things. And some of the best lines actually are in that sequence there. I think, Craig, you had one that I was rolling about.
Oh, the balloons. Yeah, he's he's naked and he's got, no way to get clothes. And there's a young schoolboy there with the balloons. And it sounds creepier than it plays out on the scene. He's naked. He walks up and he steals the balloons from the kid to cover himself up. And the next scene, the kid walks up to his mom and he goes, naked American just stole my balloons. And she goes, what?
What?
It's like one of the funniest lines. But then he ends up in a lady's coat the rest of the way home.
Stealing it, though, that's
Yeah.
a funny scene. And again, it's very John Landis. You have an older couple sitting on a park bench, and then all of a sudden, right behind the bench, running across the screen is David with the balloons. He just snags the woman's coat and just runs off. And, nobody notices anything. Nobody sees anything or says anything.
In line to get on the bus at the bus stop, and it's showing people's feet. And you got this man's naked legs, and then it pans up and he's in her coat and everybody just staring at him. And it's just typical 80s humor in the middle of this horror movie, which again breaks up the tension, which I kind of like in horror movies. I like the tension of a good slasher film. Part of the draw of Friday the 13th, for instance, is you don't get that breakup. You get that tension all the way through it. But I enjoy good tension breaking moments in a horror film too.
I think that it really humanizes David because he's in an absurd situation. They've thrown supernatural man-eating wolf concept into essentially just sort of like a British comedy.
Yeah.
Like a very, I would say a very dry British comedy. But it's like this horrible situation, a completely irreverent American, and then oblivious Brits. Just sort of it somehow works all together.
You have the constable that's got his tie on and it's not even tied properly, not even just disheveled. The underneath part of the tie is a foot longer than the fat part of the tie. It's just very typical British humor. It feels like an American movie with British humor in it.
It was, oh gosh, what is the character name? Yeah, it's the sergeant that's there with Inspector Villers who goes and interviews the doctor about David at one point in the movie. And that, again, that's also a very English horror, like classic horror trope. You've got the serious captain or whatever, and then his kind of bumbling underling that are part of it. That's, again, normal British thing. And if you think back to other British horror movies that did that exact same thing in the 70s, 1972, you had Deathline or Raw Meat, directed by Gary Sherman. This had the exact kind of situations. There's Donald Pleasance as the pretty serious inspector, and then he had his bumbling assistant. But it's really funny how much that Landis kind of pulled in from classic British horror to set these things up, and did it in a way where it's kind of satirical.
It just dawned on me. I've been watching Stephen King. I've been going through all of Stephen King's adaptations and stuff he wrote specifically as screenplays. what has dawned on me watching these movies is how well Stephen King does the human condition. He's kind of known for horror, but he does horror in a way that it's the human condition, just with the supernatural stuff happening around him. And that's really what's happening to David in this movie. He's the heart of this movie is a guy who goes to England and gets hurt and ends up in the hospital and falls in love with the nurse that's taking care of him. That's the heart of this movie. It just so happens that he was hurt by a werewolf and is now a werewolf.
He loses his best friend. When he has his nightmares, it's his family that's being massacred.
Right.
And then also later on, he attempts to call his family because he knows that he's going to be done. He knows that this is not going to end well, that he's going to die, and he's never going to see them again. He calls and he can't talk to his parents. His parents aren't home, so he ends up talking to one of his younger siblings in the hopes that maybe this the young child will pass the message on that he's saying goodbye, and he can't really get that out. He can't really say what he wants to say.
That he loves them, and
yeah,
they say, "Oh, you're just making fun of me."
Yeah, and it is pretty tragic. And there is also Alex, aside from being a very big medical ethical violation where she, brings a patient home.
He was no longer a patient.
He wasn't, but, she's just sort of like, hey, let's hook up afterwards and you can kind of stay with me, you weird stranger.
It's not even like they took any time to hook up.
No, they just like right away, it's like, this is the bed. Boom, chicka, wow. I'm going to take a shower. You want to take a shower with me?
Okay, cool. You need a shower.
But at the same time, like you feel that she has also really fallen for him, and you get the intensity of that emotion, even though, again, it's through sort of like an English, a satirical English lens where it's just sort of like, oh, I've been with 7 gentlemen before. Yeah. You're the first one I brought home and decided to have a one-night stand that I want to continue. Like it's like, oh, okay. Matter of fact, come on, let's get to work.
my sexual history, just so you know.
Yep. With this satirical English kind of way of looking at things, if you go to one of the funnier scenes, and it's the second transformation scene, he's in a porn theater and Piccadilly Circus. And, I kind of talked about this with Chris Cummins when it came to Basket Case and also with Tito Gutierrez about Frankenhooker. The Piccadilly Circus in 1981 is basically like Times Square was in the 80s, where it's porn theaters and, not exactly everything in the up and up, but it's an interesting situation. And he's in this porn theater watching the British sex film See You Next Wednesday, pun adjacent, and of course the characters on screen. When you're a teenager or younger and watching this, you're like, oh, boobies, they're naked. But if you're an adult and you actually take time to appreciate the dialogue, there's some ridiculous dialogue in that porn film. A man busts in and starts yelling, I told you I never wanted to catch you doing this again. And like the couple's like, I don't even know who you are. Like, who are you? And the gentleman's like, oh, sorry, wrong room. And like, off he goes. And then somebody calls in the middle of an orgy scene and the main woman picks up the phone and answers and is like, hello. Oh no, I believe you might have the wrong number. No, thank you. Not at all. No problem. Okay, bye. And then jives back into the orgy. And it's funny, but then also you have this gory sequence that happens immediately afterwards. You're reintroduced to all the victims who are all bloodied and sliced up, including the really happy, perky couple.
Yeah. I mean, even their lives are funny. You have the unsheltered people that are killed, and they're like, well, I don't like you very much. Why do I care what happens to you? Kill yourself, Yeah. You did this to us. And then, like you said, you've got the perky couple that are like, oh, it's fine. They're too nice to not be polite, even though this guy killed them.
Yeah,
the absurdity of it, even going back to him in her flat that day when she's at work before the first transformation, and he's bored and he's flipping through the TV. And the only 3 things that are on TV I think the first one was news, the second one was darts, and the third one was advertisement for late night porn that would be on that channel.
It was an expose. It was a naughty Nina or something like that.
Or something.
It's just like
that's the only 3 things you can watch. He just turns off the TV and
BBC One, BBC Two, and ITV. There you go. That's it.
That's
3
it.
channels. But yeah, I mean, it really it is. It's a satirical English film that
Yeah.
also is a satire of an English horror, of like classic English horror tropes. But it's through a complete American lens, and it is, it's twisted on its head with such extreme, shocking gore and like supernatural violence. And it's so jarring. And I think that's what makes it so charming. It's funny,
Right.
it's gross, it's kind of scary, and it just all kind of works well together.
Absolutely. And part of that is the pacing of this movie. An hour and a half with really no dullness in it. Everything just, it kind of happens, boom, 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 boom. He's bit, he sleeps for 3 weeks, he wakes up, he's a few days from his transformation in 2 nights, and that's the movie. You never going, okay, pick it up, what's going on? Something's always going on, and it flows well, it's paced well, and you're never bored.
Well, and that's such a good point, because at the end, the real massive climax of this movie is sheer chaos. It's very structured up to this point, but then after the transformation Piccadilly Circus, where he jumps out of the porn theater, it is absolute chaos. Cars and trucks and buses and everybody
Right.
like getting smashed, flipped over, run over, decapitated, shot through a windshield,
Yeah.
like people getting, ripped up. In the span of a few minutes, it is just pure shocking chaos. And the cool thing about that, it was actually filmed in Piccadilly Circus. He was given permission, and John Landis tells a story. He was given permission to film there by the Met Police after he put on a free screening for about 300 cops and members of the police department for the Blues Brothers. He basically put on
Wow.
a free screening of the Blues Brothers for them, and they were
Wow.
like, all right, you get 2 nights. You can film this in 2 nights. And so they practiced. They sort of like built a scale version of Piccadilly Circus and practiced that whole massive amount of destruction over and over again until they had it down, and they
Oh,
could
wow.
set and reset so quickly. And it
Because they didn't have a chance
is.
to really do a lot of takes, right?
Oh no, but they don't. I mean, they didn't have a lot of time to do it. So when they did it on the day when they filmed it, they got some amazing stuff, and it's crazy.
Well, and I wanted to talk a little bit about the decapitation or the beheading or whatever you want to call it that happens. In the 80s, it would have been real easy for them to just throw a mannequin head out there and people would have been like, oh my God. But every scene that had some sort of gore or had something of this nature happening in it was done so well. Lesser effects people would have went the easy route, and they did it. Anywhere in this movie, when you see something, it looks as real as you would think it would look, whether it's a severed arm laying there or whatever it might be, a head rolling down the street. It looks what you would think it would look like. And finally, you don't really see the full wolf until the end of it. They reveal him in his transformation. You see, like, a lot of the attacks, you just see his face, or you hear the growling, or you see a claw, or one. But that last scene, when you finally get to see the Piccadilly stuff, is when you finally get to see him as a full wolf.
Right. We've got some really great moments there, and I mentioned earlier, Blue Moon plays a few times. It opens up with Blue Moon. It's a Bobby Vinton version at the beginning.
Gotcha.
Sam Cooke's version during the transformation scene, and then finally at the last moment, he shot and killed. Alex is tears streaming down her face. She's devastated by this, and there's the dead naked body of David, and then immediate cut to black credits. And then boom, 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 like this version of Blue Moon by the Marcells that is like crazy. It's like doo-wop and wacky, and you're like, what happened? And that, I think, was probably the most John Landis of the John Landisisms in this movie, because you're almost like, okay, well, what's the next sketch? Do we have like Kentucky Fried Movie Part 2 all of a sudden? And it's like,
you've got this nurse standing there crying, trying to talk her boyfriend down, basically. And all of a sudden the shots just kind of like, they didn't care if they shot her or not.
And I think there is a tough moment there. So like she's talking to him, she knows it's him as the wolf, and you see his face, and his face
Right.
softens, like his
Right.
eyes soften, and his teeth like
Right.
covers his teeth a little bit, but then he also jumps
Yeah.
at that moment, and
Right.
so the idea is that whoever the police,
they were
the SWAT
protecting.
team or whatever, they could have thought that he was like leaping at her to attack her. But I think the reality here and the way Landis wanted it to come across is that David realizes in this moment that this is it. He has to end
He
it.
has to be put down. You don't have any.
And so suicide by cop,
Yeah.
which tragic, horrible, especially in Alex's eyes.
Another
but
part of the
it's
human
inevitable.
condition being shown in this. He knows,
Inevitable.
he knew he has to die. He, like you said, he called his family before that night rolled around. He tried to get the police to arrest him earlier in the day. And like you said, he had that self-realization in that moment that, hey, if I do this, they're going to put me down. So.
Absolutely. So quick question here.
Sure.
Out of all the moments in this movie, what is your favorite scary moment? Or maybe like a jump scare or some real moment of terror in this? What would you say is your favorite?
For me, after Jack's been attacked and David's running off and he gets, 20, 30 feet away, and he's like, wait, my friend. And he turns around and he goes back and he sees his friend just laying there bloody. And he's like, he's having this moment of like, what am I going to do? Am I going to carry him? And out of nowhere, the wolf hits him. To me, that to me is probably my favorite scary moment. I've become desensitized to scary moments in movies for the most part, but what I would consider a scary moment, that's probably it for me.
Yeah. It's a good moment of dread because you know what's coming. Like you know
it's going to happen.
It's going to happen. For me, I would say probably the scene in the underground where he's stalking that one businessman. And it is like you said, a lot of the views of the full transformation, the fully transformed werewolf, are obscured. You don't see everything at once by that point. But what you do see is you see a shape.
Right.
At that sequence. And it's, as he knows he's being stalked, the businessman, he's being stalked through these empty tunnels. And
basically
that
like subway.
Yeah. And that to me, like those kinds of sequences in films, and there are plenty of in several horror movies where people are walking through empty subway stations, and it's very unsettling because you feel
it all takes place in the subway.
Oh, absolutely. Or Midnight Meat Train or something like that. There's a lot that can go on. But that sequence right there, it's just he's trying to get away, and he looks back, and briefly you see the shape, and it's blurry, it's not very clear, and that's when he tries to get away, and he's very bad at getting away, and ends up falling on the escalator and turning around as
that's
the POV
so
comes
real
on.
though, because if you're in that moment and your adrenaline's pumping and your fine motor skills go away, you're left with just like your base emotions and your base movements, and you fall and you're toast.
Yep. And there's no help coming. You're too far underground. You're too far down. There's nobody that can come down and get you in time, and there's nobody else around that can help you in time. So that's
thinking on that question though. As a child, as a teenager, preteen, when I saw this, I probably would have answered that question differently. It would have been when the werewolf zombie Nazi jumps out at her after you think that he's woken up from his dream.
That's a good jump scare. That was really a good jump scare for sure. Yeah. We mentioned it at the very beginning. This movie, again, very popular. It was made for less than 10 million, made 6 times that back in 1981. So it was a huge hit. It's been very popular, since then, in the past 40 some years. 45th year, by the way, 45th anniversary this year.
We're old.
One of the things that a movie this popular usually would have is a sequel. And this did get
This
a
movie did
sequel.
not have any sequels.
It did get a sequel. I know that you don't want to acknowledge
did not.
But it did, sadly. Unfortunately, I should
Yes.
say. So originally, they did approach John Landis about doing this sequel, and he kind of had sequelitis at that point. Like he's like, no, I don't really, I don't think I want to do this. And so it was rewritten multiple times and
Right.
filmed. The werewolves are CGI, and we're talking about American Werewolf in Paris. Julie Delpy plays like the daughter of David. It's CGI werewolves. It is an absolute mess, and it got savaged by critics. Definitely does not have the goodwill of the first movie.
It's a bad remake more than it's a sequel.
Yeah, it's kind of
because it's the same story.
Mm-hmm.
It's just in Paris and it's done poorly. And it's that because it had good people in it. Some of the actors were not bad, and it just is what it is.
Some people, you know what? There may be some people out there who enjoy it, but it is not very well liked critically and does not have the legacy.
I've watched it more than once, but I do like bad horror movies. So
yeah, there's that. So if somebody wants to come on and talk about how American Werewolf in Paris is their favorite horror movie, I'm partial to do that and share their love.
You're a brave person.
But, interestingly enough, I know that the idea of a remake of the original has been bandied about for quite some time. In fact, it first started back in 2009.
Really?
You had two producers that were potentially looking into doing that. And I guess it was Sean and Brian first. And they just couldn't get it off the ground. And about 7 years later, they were able to attach Max Landis, John Landis' son, to the projects. Max Landis did write a first draft of the script and was talking about it excitedly back in 2017. And that happened to also be the year that a lot of stuff came out with the Me Too movement about him. He was accused of sexual assault. He had a lot of people came forward, a lot of women came forward talking about abuse on sets and in other aspects of his life. And so that quietly went away. Yeah. And so presumably it was dead and gone, and the idea buried. However, in 2019, Robert Kirkman was attached. Robert Kirkman of Walking Dead fame and Invincible fame and the most recent Transformers and Void Rivals and all these things that I love in the comic world. He was attached to potentially produce or write a new treatment or remake of American Werewolf in London. But that was 2019, and we're 7 years later.
The reality is that not everything needs to be remade.
Right.
And after a fresh watch of this, I watch this movie maybe once every 4 or 5 years. To me, if you throw it out there and if you were to go to social media right now, just make a post that said, what's the best werewolf movie ever made? This one's going to be at the top, if not the top, of most people's list. So not everything has to be remade. This movie is still out there. It's still beloved. Sometimes it's best to just leave it alone and let it be its own thing.
Yeah. When the actual film itself, like the complete package itself, it has such a lasting appeal. It tends to not really
learn anything from Psycho and Omen?
Oh, well.
I mean, and Psycho is a shot-for-shot remake, and no one liked it. So sometimes it's better just to leave it alone.
Yeah. I think this one, would I hate to see a remake of it?
No,
I wouldn't.
I would watch it.
Yeah.
I would watch it,
but it doesn't.
There's always a chance it's going to be good, but you've got to be willing to step apart from what this movie is and make your own thing. Follow the same tropes and the same basic story, but make your own thing, and then that would potentially work.
Well, cool. Well, in any case, Craig, thank you again for joining.
I love doing these with you, and sorry it's been so long. We had a move and it's just been chaos, but I intend to be back on. I've got a couple of movies we've talked about that we want to get to.
absolutely. And I hope we get to those soon, because this is, as always, this is really fun, talking movies with you, and especially a movie like this, which is, not just, a favorite of yours and mine, but it is considered a horror classic, a modern horror classic.
Well,
So,
and it's one of those, I was legit surprised when I brought it to you that no one else had claimed it yet. The other two were one that I've done with you have been ones that were because my mom brought them to my attention as a child, and I love those movies, but this one is wholly me. What's funny is I can still remember watching a Siskel and Ebert review of it.
And I think famously Ebert was not a fan of this movie, so.
Yeah.
But,
But
you
I
know
didn't
what?
care. They were talking about it.
Exactly. They were talking about it and, bringing attention to it. Somebody, thankfully, or a lot of people, thankfully, disagreed with Ebert. But yeah, thanks again. I really
Man, I
appreciate it.
appreciate it.
Yeah. And, we'll talk to you next time. You've just listened to another episode of The Bear Cave of Terror. And if you haven't seen An American Werewolf in London, or after listening to us, are struck again with an irresistible compulsion to watch it again, it is streaming free on Tubi and Fandango at home, and also available to rent or for sale digitally or on physical media. And Craig, if listeners would like to get in touch, how would they do that?
Easiest way find me is on Facebook, and you can find me through Steve's friends is probably the easiest way to find me. Or you can just Craig Lantz, and I'll be there.
And then also, you can follow us. You can follow the Bear Cave of Terror on Blue Sky and Instagram at, all one word, Bear Cave of Terror, or send an email to bearcaveofterror@gmail.com if people use email anymore. A list of sources will be available in the show notes if you'd like to learn more about An American Werewolf in London. And remember, stay on the road, watch out for the moon, and keep off the moors. Good night, everybody.
Yes, sir?
A naked American man stole my balloon.
What?